What's going on, everyone? I hope you all are ready for the longest video I have ever made on the channel. We are ranking all of the leaders in Star Wars Unlimited. That is 110 leaders due to popular request from my patrons. They made me include the Hoth starter set leaders, or Battle for Hoth leaders, which, to be fair, one of them is honestly not like a D tier. So therefore, we've got to include them. But we've got 110 total leaders. Of course, subtracting the two banned ones, we're at 108. This will be kind of the final tier list for a while that will be of this amount because we've got rotation coming up. So a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. I will try to go ahead and leave images of the leaders as we go along. As I talk about them, I'm going to separate them based on aspect. So you have the Vigilance ones first, then Command, then Aggression, and Cunning. Honestly, I would separate it by each individual leaders, but then the timestamp box gets to 108, 110 lines, and that doesn't look very nice. So we're going to separate by aspect instead. But this is going to be a huge video. It's going to take me forever. I mean, at least a couple hours of actual video time. So hopefully you guys are getting ready to go to bed or something. You guys can watch this when you go to sleep. So huge thank you again to my patrons. And let's talk about the tiers before we dive into the list today. So diving into our tiers here, we're going to start off with S tier. The S tier leaders, these are going to be ones that are truly top of the meta. Mind you, we are doing a leader tier list, not a deck tier list necessarily. So some leaders are going to get a little bit of bonus points for having different versatility in terms of the options that they go for. But S tier leaders, these are going to be the dominant ones. These are going to be the ones that you bring to tournaments you have a good shot to win. Now, I think the S tier is going to be relatively small because I do think there's a step down between, some of the top echelon of leaders and then, just right underneath, which is where we see A tiers. These are still competitive leaders, still options that you still want to and have potential to take down tournaments. But they may not perform either as universally solid against all the matchups, or maybe they're just performing a little bit better because they're good against some of the top S tier leaders. B tier leaders, this is where we start to get into the point where, yes, you can bring it to tournament. Yes, you can win. And it's still reasonably competitive, but this is definitely a step down. Like if you're going to bring a B tier list, you're going to be definitely worse off. This is more, in my opinion, the store showdown level of leaders where you do some fun things, you do well, and you actually have a coherent strategy. And some leaders in here are still going to be unique and providing some sort of benefit. C tier, this is where we start to get to leaders that are honestly just worse than the ones above. Like you might think, oh, well, maybe they have this advantage or this one, but when you start to compare it, really, it's just like, well, why would I even run this one in most cases? Or they have a specific, very niche thing that they do, but that niche thing just doesn't really work in the meta. And then D tier leaders, these are going to be the ones that you truly just make a deck worse for trying to build towards. You're like, okay, let me load up, this specific leader. He cares about, I don't know, let's just say he cares about off aspect cards. Okay, well, I'm going to load up a bunch of off aspect cards, but trying to do that combination just ends up making your deck worse if you had just played a normal style of deck, even with that same leader, but within the aspect. So trying to build towards them, they're making your deck worse, straight up. So those are the tiers. We've got a lot of leaders to go through. Let's not waste any time and dive into our Vigilance ones first. All right, we're going to zoom in a little bit here, but I'm sure we're going to have to zoom out as we go along. First one we've got is Chancellor Palpatine. This is the new Chancellor Palpatine, the one that has actually come along with set 6. So initially, I put him kind of in the middle of the pack of B tier in terms of what I expected him to do. He is a very popular one. A lot of people are really interested in playing him, but his overall performance hasn't actually been truly that great. He hasn't even broken into the top 10, but he is in that kind of top 15 range of leaders. So I think it would be remiss of me to put any lower than A tier. This guy's actually pretty solid. The ability to deploy a bunch of smuggle or plot units when he deploys is pretty good. You don't have that many great plot units, and that's kind of the sad part about Palpatine. But playing a Vigilance Villainy Data Vault deck is good. It's still good. And you have a 6/8 to deploy leader, and you have a leader that could draw you a lot of cards or at least filter through your deck, which is useful. So all of those things, it's going to put in the A tier. Sort of like a mid to low A tier, though. Gar Saxon is next up, and, well, this is definitely one of my favorite options. Had a lot of Gar Saxon yellow in the sets before, but more recently, Garcex and ECL with the Darth Vader is just excellent. And, you know, that being an absolute powerhouse and kind of swapping the game in your favor on that 6 resource turn is extremely powerful. But you also have a lot of other cards that just do some really great stuff. You know, Lom Pike, Secretive Sage, Director Krennic, all of those cards just being 3/2 shields, shielded on turn 1 or synergizing with other abilities. It's a very, very powerful deck. It's got to be, you know, an A tier list. It's on the lower end for sure. I think it's actually lower than Palpatine just based on how well the kind of go bigger strategy has been for the overall game. You know, when you're competing against a lot of the mid-range decks at the top of the meta, which we'll talk about later on, Palpatine does a little bit better as far as I found, but Gar Saxon still holds his own and does some pretty good work. Jabba the Hutt, next up, we've got a new leader from set 6 as well, similar to Chancellor Palpatine. This one really is unique in that you are, you know, damaging your units are getting damaged and potentially playing things that damage themselves, and then using his action to get some damage on opponent's units. But really the kind of big thing with Jabba is when you flip him, you've got a, you know, big butt unit that whenever your units don't die, you get to deal damage back to units, which is actually pretty powerful. The problem with this is that you need to match whatever lane your opponent's playing, and that can be very tricky. And there's also some decks that are really powerful, leaders that are really powerful in the top ends that really mess up Jabba. So I don't think he's performed nearly as well as I was hoping for sure. He's definitely in like the mid to low B tier category. Iden, one of our classic decks here. Honestly, still very impressive. The overall strategy of playing Vigilance, Villainy, Command, specifically the Data Vault, is just good. It is just good. And, you know, Iden is a little bit different than the other ones. So the other ones have different angles that they attack on, right? Palpatine gives you this overwhelming amount of resources and ability to kind of generate that value and end the game, and a big leader. You know, some other options like Krennic and Kylo will talk about their advantages and disadvantages and what their styles are as well. You know, Kylo's got the deploy with all the craving powers and things like that comes down. You've got Kira that deploys a lot earlier but deals damage to everything. So there's all sorts of different mechanics that they attack on. They're very similar styles of decks, but Iden is truly the hard control variant that heals you a lot, and there's still a place for that. It's an A tier list. Next up, we've got Ahsoka Tano. This one, force-based deck. We've seen this from previous season. You've seen my rating before. Really hasn't changed a whole lot. To be honest, I think Ahsoka probably fits down to the low C, high D tier. I'm gonna start with a low C tier. As we put more leaders on the list, and as I get, you know, more things to look at, I'm going to be moving things around, but I do think Ahsoka is really quite weak. The problem with her is that you need to generate the Force and then use an action to create Sentinel, but you need to attack first to generate the Force. Therefore, if you've attacked to generate the Force, your opponent has an ability to attack before you get the Sentinel up. And then you have a leader that doesn't really do anything else but provide Sentinel and be, you know, a 5/6. So it really just doesn't do anything. It's like a little bit better of a Chewbacca, and Chewbacca never really did anything. So C tier, probably D tier. Lama Su's the next one up. This is another new one where we get to play with upgrades, getting your upgrades giving you a discount, which is really quite nice, dealing damage to your units. And then, of course, when we flip Lama Su, we do get the ability to kind of recur those upgrades from the discard pile. Pretty solid in terms of upgrade strategy, and I do like that game plan. The problem is the game plan itself, even though it's fun and it's one of the better leaders for doing so, upgrades are weak. You know, you've got so many leaders that can either give you overwhelming power on their units to just knock out your units, or they've got just straight up removal options. Like if you look above, right, with Jabba, Agar, Iden, and Chancellor Palpatine, all of those, granted we're in Vigilance right now, have ways to deal immediate removal options, and that really hinders upgrade-based decks. There are some cool things you could do. I think the overall strategy is just not what you want to be doing in Star Wars Limited at the current moment, so it's going to be a C tier, even though I think the leader ability is actually decently powerful. Well, I don't sugarcoat my D tier leaders, and I mentioned Chewbacca earlier. He's a D tier. You know, back in set 1, when we were seeing people try to bring in like Chewbacca Green, Chewbacca ECL, and leveraging the 2/9, it was pretty cool. Problem is that the game is so much more powerful these days. Like set 1, we didn't even have like ECL Wrecker. Nowadays, you have ECL Wrecker, so you could just straight up one-shot Chewbacca. You've got Rivals Fall. You've got Poe Dameron. You've got like all these other cards that are just strong. So it hasn't really been above like the B tier category, really ever. But ever since set 1 passed, the power level of the game has gotten so much higher that this action to play something cheap to give it Sentinel is just not strong enough. Luke is up next, and this one is always one that's kind of stayed in that very, very middle of the pack. Always does something reasonable and, you know, has some value in which you want to play him for. And it's not really any different. You still have the Alliance Dispatcher turn 1, give it a shield token, which is always a strong ability to do, right? To prep for the future discounts. I do think Luke Data Vault is the way to go. I do think him giving shield tokens isn't necessarily that strong of ability, but Command Heroism has gotten a lot stronger, and I think by default, Luke has gotten stronger. Even though I don't think Luke is what you want to be doing, I do think he's gotten stronger with this latest set. And so I don't think he's gotten out of the B tier, but I definitely think he's like mid to high B tier with like the additions of Captain Typho and cards like that. Mina Terry is another good one, where you're doing what Luke wants to do. It's just that Luke's payoff isn't nearly as high as some other options out there. Leia, another set 6 leader. This one very similar to Rey, where Rey was able to pay 1 to put experience tokens on things that have that low power. Leia has the same thing, where you pay 1, you put experience tokens on things, at least they don't, as long as they don't match the aspect that you've disclosed. This can be pretty strong, and it allows you to play things like Battlefield Marine, for example, and still put upgrades on it, whereas Rey can't. So you get a little bit of versatility there. The problem is that you have to play a little bit of an awkward deck, because if you're playing like Leia Data Vault, which is what I think is the best option, you have to start playing mono green cards. And what I mean by mono green is like you have to play like Protect the Pod, like solid command. Because if you play Command Heroism, it matches an aspect with like Battlefield Marine. And if you play, you know, let's say, I don't know, you're playing like Village Protectors, for example. You play Village Protectors, suddenly you need a mono green card in order to give an experience token to that. It's a little bit easier with Vigilance itself, because you got like Fell the Dragon, Rivals Fall, and things like that to play in your deck. But I think the actual restriction of Leia's ability is more restrictive than Rey's, so she's going to end up in the kind of lower end of B tier. All right, one that I've been holding out hope for a very long time actually got significantly weaker after the bannings. We've got Chirrut. He's going to be a D tier. You know, I think, and I don't remember on my last tier list, I don't even think I did a leader tier list for set 4 because there's so many leaders, I didn't have enough time. But I believe Chirrut has never entered the D tier. This is the first time, and I think it's time. You know, the 3-5 for 5 is just horrible. I mean, we're in the stage where 3-6 is like a bare minimum, and that's bad. So a 3-5 is like, oh my gosh, what are we doing here, guys? And then the fact that he's got a force tag no longer is relevant in the game, because there's so many leaders with a force tag that, you know, having a force tag on an early deploy leader like Chirrut, well, it's not even early enough anymore, or it's not even a big enough stat line. And then you got force throw band. I mean, this guy does nothing anymore. The extra 2 toughness on a Sentinel can be okay, like on another Chirrut unit, for example, to keep the Sentinel alive to prevent some extra damage, but that's the only time where it's relevant. And then, of course, he still dies to take down and Rivals Fall and all that good stuff. So, yeah, D tier. Sorry, Chirrut. So this is one of the Vigilance Villainy kind of decks that I mentioned when talking about Iden and how they all kind of attack on different angles. Krennic here has a little bit of a different angle to attack on, in that you do get this early deploy leader that helps you restore HP. So you do have that angle that's similar to Iden, but you end up just playing a bunch of good units. And then because they don't get finished off immediately, or because they're just a little bit better statted because of Krennic's ability himself, you just can trade off earlier. And that's pretty nice. I think earlier on in the sets, this was a lot better when ECL was more popular and, you know, units weren't just completely one-shotting each other all the time. Nowadays, I think it's a lot weaker than the strategies that like Palpatine and Iden are going for. So even though I think Krennic is still good, I think it's one of those leaders that's going to end up in the B tier underneath Iden and Palpatine. Next up, we've got Satine, and this one's got to be a D tier as well, guys. Oh, I really liked Satine. The 0-8 stat line is very unique. It's the only leader in the game without any power. We have Restore 4 on her, so that's a lot of restoring to be done. But the problem is that if you start to build around Satine, you end up in a really, really weak deck if you're trying to beat, you know, most of the meta. You have a 0-8 leader, so you have no combat power on that area of the game, and there's so many options that could just completely run through you. There are some cool things, like technically, if you're playing Satine and you put a Darksaber on her, that can win the game sometimes. But here's the thing, if I play any other leader and put the Darksaber on them, it probably would have ended the game just as well in those specific circumstances. So that's the problem, and probably better than what Satine did. So that's the problem with Satine, is that the gameplay that you're going with can work for any leader for the most part, but you just have a 0-8 if it doesn't go well, and 0-8s really stink. They just stink. Alrighty, we've got a banger next up. Okay, guys, let's not sugarcoat this. This is our first S tier. We've got Kira. Kira has been S tier all the way since set 2, really, or at least if not S tier, very high A tier, definitely at the top of the meta since she's been announced. So what's interesting about Kira is the ability to just deal damage to a bunch of things. Obviously, synergizes really, really well with the overwhelming barrage kind of game plan, but also like her action is relevant in a lot of cases. The ability to put shield tokens on various sentinels. I mean, we saw that in the earlier sets. But we also just have, again, a very, very powerful combination of Kira plus Overwhelming Barrage or Kira plus the, defeat a unit with 2 or less remaining HP cards. So the new Cad Bane ends up working well with Kira. Devastating Gunship, all good cards, ends the game quickly. He ends up being a 4/4 when she deploys as well, which is quite strong. Kira, the reason why she is powerful is because she, while playing the, controlling Vigilance Villainy combination of cards, and playing like Darth Vader and Maul and Avengers as your win cons, you have the ability to completely reset the board way earlier than a lot of these other decks, like Iden and Palpatine, with the 4 to deploy leader, or our turn 4 deploy leader with Overwhelming Barrage. And that's what makes her so much more consistently powerful than a lot of these other ones. Sometimes it's just too long to wait for all the other cards to flow in, and Kira does it soon enough to where you can actually take advantage of all the more powerful cards that you have. Next up, we've got Cunning, one from set 5, one that works with all the creatures and Spectre units out there. Creatures never really got there in the game. Spectres ended up doing some work in terms of, just being good cards, but it's not like you want to build around all the Spectres in your deck. I mean, Sabine's Masterpiece ends up doing some work, but you don't have enough very, very solid cards to make Cunning super, super strong. He does come down as a 5/8 with shielded, which is nice if you have the Spectre or creature unit. And there's the Ghost when it's upgraded. You give Sentinel to everything. The problem is that you need to get there, and oftentimes Cunning just doesn't allow you to get there. And so he ends up being somewhat of like a C tier option. Still decent in terms of kind of an interesting mechanic, but just outside the B tier. Talk about one that has had a massive glow up, especially in this set, but also at the last part of set 5. We've got Yoda, and we've got different angles in which Yoda attacks on. But Yoda is an S tier. He's an S tier. He's actually better than Kira in terms of the overall performance. Command Heroism has gotten such a significant bonus in this recent set. Captain Typho, Mina Bonteri are 2 immediate answers. Like I said, amongst basically all of the Command Heroism decks that are running around out there. But, when I first saw Yoda, my initial thought was that this guy was going to be absolutely disgusting. I mean, when you think about it, like when you have a late to deploy leader, you want something that's going to recover you on board and then be able to close out the game or maybe sustain in the game. And he does all 3. He's got a good amount of power. He's got a good enough toughness, so he sticks around for a little while. He's got Restore 2, so allows to recover in the game. And then when he comes down, he kills a unit on board. I mean, all of those things are extremely powerful in what you want to be doing on Yoda. And then his front side action is actually relevant as well. Not only because you can filter through cards, but he also has a very, very powerful play in You're My Only Hope. And that allows you to do some disgusting things, like play Luke on turn 4, right? That is just not something you should be doing in general. So Yoda just ends up being absolutely massive, and it's just gotten better and better and better. And now he's like top 3 deck in the format. Top 3 leader. But then he's also, his deck is top 3 in terms of Yoda Green, Yoda Data Vault. But there's also Yoda Red floating around out there. So all very, very good options. All right, we move from Kira and Yoda and all that stuff to Finn. Finn is a D tier. Finn just, there's nothing you want to be doing with this guy. Like even trying to build something towards his action. Like I played many decks where I was playing like Inspiring Mentor and Rose Tico to combo with Finn, and it does some things, but like oftentimes I'd rather just play a deck that's well constructed and trying not to pull off these combos. The only redeeming factor for Finn is that he's a 4/6 for 5, and a 4/6 for 5 is perfectly reasonable. Nothing like exciting about it, but it is solid. And compared to a lot of the other leaders in the D tier, and even some in the C tier category, that's what's boosting him up. The leader ability and everything associated with that is just so mediocre. I would even take an argument of putting him into the low C tier, depending on how many more D tiers we get in here, but we'll find out later. Speaking of things that can be argued in for the D tier, we've got Newt Gunray. I'm going to put this guy in C tier. because he does do something slightly unique. It's just that the thing he does just doesn't do a whole lot. And similar to, you know, the D tier kind of category, if you build towards it, it can actually do some powerful things. The problem is that the counters to them are very, very harsh, and it can be very difficult to get your feet off the ground. So he's all about the exploit, you know, exploit cards, get more battle joy tokens, you know, go ahead and exploit more cards. And if you exploit an early Malevolence against some decks, that's sometimes good enough to win the game. But the problem is that it's super inconsistent. So I do think he does some things powerful, and like the exploit idea in general is interesting and can be powerful. It's just that it doesn't actually end up being a winning game plan against a lot of the top decks. The only exception to that is like when you're playing Invisible Hand and Invisible Hand comes down, you can exploit that out with like Dooku, for example. And that's because you create a bunch of units on board and you get more value than just the exploit card. Because that's the problem. So you're sacrificing all these small units for one big unit, and then that one big unit gets answered, and then you've wasted like 4 cards. And that's the biggest problem. But I think he deserves a little bit higher than the D tier because he does something a little bit more unique. Alrighty, we got the when defeated triggers from Thrawn up next. And this guy has always been intriguing to me. I think this is one that's always interesting to look out for on every new set based upon what when defeated triggers we've gotten. Because being able to repeat when defeated triggers is extremely strong, especially with cards like No Glory being able to like double up on Ruthless Raiders or K2SO triggers. I mean, that is strong. And overall, I mean, he does pretty well. He is certainly up there in like the high B, low A tier options. He actually has done some decently well performances in across some of the PQs out there. I mean, Thrawn is just one of those cards that you just get a lot of value out of. And that sometimes is enough to win you games. And that's what Thrawn does. We've got Obi-Wan Kenobi next up. This one giving you the action to heal up units and then deploying and then having a big sentinel body that also heals up units. You know, honestly, if we had talked about this guy, you know, earlier on or in another set, I would have put him a lot higher. I think when Tarkin Town's really strong, Obi-Wan gets better because there's a lot of random damage pings that fly around. These days, I mean, you do have a little bit of that. I mean, there's still like Han 4 Tarkin Town rolling around, and there's still Quinlan and still Cad Bane and things like that. And those matchups can be, you know, where Obi-Wan's leader ability truly shines. But right now, it's more of a mid-range format. And while Obi-Wan, you know, he can deploy and be a good leader as the flip side, the front side action is just nowhere near some of the power levels of some of the other leaders above him. So he's going to enter into the C tier category. I don't quite think he's B tier, but you could argue for a low B tier, and I wouldn't be complaining about that. Rose Tico is next. And, well, Rose. We've got an interesting action, to be honest. You know, Rose and Finn kind of go together in my mind. They're both 5 to deploy 4/6s. They both have a weird ability, but I think Rose's ability is far superior to Finn's. The nice thing about Rose is that if you do play vehicles that have ambush, you get to immediately ambush and then immediately heal them up, which is actually decent. And then sometimes that could be extremely obnoxious. Like you put a perimeter ATRT down, you put a pilot on it, and you just start attacking and then you heal. And it is like impossible to get through that. Big Sentinel constantly gets healed. I mean, we've seen like Chirrut, right? And how difficult Chirrut can be to get through with the force mechanic. And it's kind of similar to Rose, where like instead of, you know, Chirrut and you're getting that 2 damage prevention, in Rose's case, you're getting the 2 damage heal. So it's kind of the same thing as long as you're not getting one shot. And so that's where Rose kind of comes in. So I think her leader ability, not great, but I think it's definitely out of the D tier into the C tier category. And Rose Yellow is kind of fun to play, to be honest. All right, I'm doing this for my patron, guys. We've got Lando next up. I know there's one of you out there watching this, assuming you get to this point in my patron, that's going to flame me for putting Lando this low, because I know it's your pet deck. But we've got to put Lando in the C tier category. I don't think he's really stronger than that. We have a really late deploy for Sentinel. And, you know, if you compare that to like the Yoda flip, oh my gosh, it's so gross. But it's not necessarily fair to compare to Yoda because, you know, it's the top of the meta. But even if you start comparing it to other lists out there, like you have to split your forces between ground and space, which can be good in some circumstances, depending on the matchup. But then in some circumstances, like horrible because you want to be focusing all in one arena because your opponent's focusing all in one arena. And that can just completely harm you. And you don't have a leader deploy until way late. And then that leader deploy is just a sentinel in one arena. And so it's like, you know, are you really doing anything for me? Yes, he is. It's niche, but he does have some value in getting some shield tokens to certain units. It can be decent. It's just not very commonly decent. And that's where the inconsistency comes in. And that's where he ends up in C tier. So sorry. I apologize. I know. I apologize. Next up, we've got one that I was honestly never a really big fan of. Even when it took down the Galactic Championship, I was saying I think Talzin is really just people, you know, running in with the new cards and playing a deck that's super solid, but nothing like incredible. At the end of set 5, it was kind of somewhere around the top of A tier, and before the bannings. And then after the bannings, it kind of dropped. And then I think now it's somewhere around like the middle of the pack, B tier. You still have some solid, interesting options. I think Talzin Yellow has become a lot more popular because of the banning of Force Throw. And you do have some fun things like Darth Treya in Talzin where you can double trigger Talzin, so you can get -2/-2 to something in a turn, and that can be pretty relevant. And so that's a nice little addition. But overall, I mean, set 5 really was a self-contained set, in my opinion, where all the Force decks just got so much stuff. And with the new set, you didn't get a whole lot to add to Talzin. And then on top of that, you had bannings that took away from the previous Talzin Red. Yeah, ends up in kind of the middle of the pack at the current moment. Next up, we've got Kylo. Kylo is interesting. This is one that did excellently last set, just being the, you know, Vigilance Villainy command control leader that just a little bit different than Kira or Aiden, like I mentioned, but having this big leader deploy that immediately kind of maintains parity on board because you have all these action cheatings that you're able to do, and allows you to put up a big sentinel, and allows you to end the game quickly. All those things are extremely relevant, and you can still do all those things. You still have the nice combo element, not even combo, but synergy element of discarding heroism cards for Anakin, which is very, very powerful. Kylo Red is a lot weaker without Force Throw and kind of the change of the meta, but the controlling variant is still strong. And I do find, and its performance has been oftentimes a little bit better than Chancellor Palpatine, but it's very similar in that regard in terms of like what it's able to do. So going to be an A tier, going to be at the higher end of A tier, and it's still a very solid list. Similar to the new Palpatine, it's kind of in that top 15 deck range in terms of performance. Next up, we've got Asajj, and Asajj has been one that I've probably fought against more than any other in like the low tier decks. This one's going to get an immediate C tier for me. It's honestly not terrible, but Asajj is just one that everyone loves to play. You've got Asajj Tarkentown, which works really well with Asajj's abilities. You have a lot of units that work well with her abilities as well, like Ogdo Bogdo, for example. And those can be pretty strong, right? The ability to deal 1 damage to your opponent's units and kind of set up for some powerful plays, and potentially enable some of your own plays, whether that's with grit or just not being able to attack before they were damaged, like Ogdo. These are strong things to do. And if you are running Tarkentown, you have the ability to disrupt their early game, which can be pretty strong as well. And then you have this, like, you know, reasonably strong leader deploy, especially if you're dealing damage to your own units, where you pilot it on and you go to town with a ton of damage on your unit. And you have this massive grit space unit that just is hard to deal with. Yeah, not terrible. But all that said, it's still only 1 damage, and you can lane dodge it, and it's still late deploy, and it's not a crazy amount of power. So yeah, C tier. And next up, we've got Rey. I mentioned earlier about the command heroism kind of run-ins, and well, we've got another leader that benefits from those additions. Captain Typho, Mina Bonteri, Queen Amidala, all of which are very solid in Rey Data Vault. Rey Data Vault was a list back in set 2-3, really. Set 3 mainly, where it was just performing at the top of the meta. It was just doing really well. You had the Restore 3, which allowed you to just kind of stay in the game and kind of take advantage of all your big value plays later on in the game. You had the Experience Token to kind of compete in the early game. It was doing some big things. These days, it's still in the top 15 range. It's kind of right smack dab in the middle between Palpatine and Kylo for me. It is in those same echelon of decks, where you do have this more controlling style, but because it's heroism, you do put on pressure a lot more than your Vigilance Villainy options out there. And then with the new edition of, you know, Kelleran Beck and Home 1, and not Home 1, that's not a new edition, but Kelleran Beck specifically as a new edition, or even if you're going to go into the Force game plan, which I've seen some Rays do, but I think Rey Data Vault's a little bit better. You've got Yodas if you do need it. But overall, an A tier list. To finish off the Vigilance category, however, is a solid D tier. We've got Nala Se. Another one where one of my patrons is going to be real sad. Actually, I think it's the same patron that plays Lando and Nala Se, now that I think about it. So you know what? There's a reason, okay? The decks are bad. I've seen Nala Se Reds. I've seen Nala Se ECLs. I've seen Double Blue Nala Se's. I've seen Nala Se Yellow. Here's the problem with Nala Se. You build this whole deck, you're playing Vigilance Villainy, and you go into this secondary aspect, and suddenly you're playing clones. And then these clones are already units that are not that good, okay? Most of the decks aren't even playing these clones, and there's a reason why they're not playing them. But then you're in an aspect combination that's already way better than these cards. You should just play a normal deck, and you'll be better off. Yes, 4 deploy 1/7. Maybe if it was a 2/7, there'd be something there, but yeah, bad stat line, bad ability. Don't build it. Moving on to the command options. We get to start off with the set 6 leader in Bail Organa. So this one's very, very interesting. One of the stronger options for Unity of Purpose comboing because of his early deploy and his ability to repeat that deploy with, well, his unique discard 2 cards to deploy him. Problem is that the rest of him is pretty weak. So you can go in the direction of like Vigilance, Command, Heroism, and go with like the Yoda game plan and try to go like high value, you know, use a lot of your actions to return the resources and play those very, very powerful cards. The problem is that it just underperforms in that regard. So you really want to do something weird with him. And when I say weird, I mean like the Unity of Purpose combo. It's kind of inconsistent. So to me, he's that like C tier option. Not terrible, has a purpose. That purpose is relatively inconsistent. Captain Rex, very similar to Bail Organa in what I was mentioning earlier, which was the Unity of Purpose style. This one, a little bit later to deploy, but you do get a second unit. And really, there hasn't been any other strategy with Captain Rex besides the Unity of Purpose combination. I think when it comes down to it, I actually do find Bail to be a little bit, you know, a little more flimsy, to be honest, because he's a 3-3 to deploy. There are a lot of situations where things could just completely wipe you out. Even just regular units, right? Can just continuous attacks if they deploy a unit every turn can really mess with your strategy. Whereas at least Captain Rex comes down. You oftentimes can't kill Captain Rex immediately. And then even if you can, you still get a Clone Trooper token. So I think he's a little bit stronger than Bail. And for that reason, I've got to put him in like maybe the top end of C tier or the bottom end of B tier. But I'm going to keep him kind of closer to the top end of C tier. Again, just slightly better. Padme, we've got a Republic-based leader. This is one where I genuinely do think building towards Padme makes your deck quite a bit weaker. The ability to, you know, pay 1 to try to draw a card could be useful, but the problem is that you have 3 units down in order for that to work. That's really tough, especially in a deck that's trying to play a little bit slower and draw cards and do that type of game plan. You're going to lose a lot of your units. So you're not actually going to be able to draw a lot of cards, and then you can only draw Republic cards. You can only search the top 3, all of which is what you don't want to be doing. And so I think Padme is actually just a straight up D tier. You have Restore 1, which is significantly weaker than Restore 2. You have a 2/7 for 5, pretty sad stat line. It's overall pretty weak. Honestly, Wat Tambor has been kicking up a little bit of a storm in this beginning of the set, actually, not previous set, with, well, Unity of Purpose as well. You know, it's one of those styles where, like, if your deck doesn't know what to do in Command, you could probably just go double Command, play Unity of Purpose, and win some games. The problem is like, okay, yes, you can do that, but which one's the best at it? I don't think Wat Tambor is as good as Bail or Captain Rex, but I do think if you go like Wat Tambor Red, you have a different angle to attack on, which is just a bunch of small units and taking advantage of those. So I do think you go Unity of Purpose. I generally prefer going Red and just playing a bunch of units and taking advantage of his action instead of going the Unity of Purpose route. That said, he still does some things, and I'm going to put him in the C tier category just beneath kind of Bail and Captain Rex. It has been a long, long time since I've actually played and talked about Hondo, but Hondo, this was one of my pet decks back in set 2 after George Hudson did some pretty good work with Hondo Blue. Ended up bringing it to a store showdown and doing some absolute work with it. So it's always had a soft place in my heart, but I don't think this guy is doing anything special these days. Pretty weak deploy stat line. His ability is pretty relatively weak. You know, in the earlier versions of Star Wars Limited, I think his ability was actually able to do some things. The problem is now we have so many ways to draw additional cards that like having that secondary hand almost in your resource pile by playing all the bad smuggle cards just ends up being bad because so many decks have, you know, the Dr. Pershing to draw you cards, or Palpatine to draw cards, or Kylo Ren to use the discard pile to get value out of if you're playing the Command, Vigilance, Villainy, Control style deck. So Hondo, he has something. He's got something, but he's not got a lot. He's a C tier. OG Palpatine here from set 1 fat unit deploy with, or a fat leader deploy at 8 resources has still stood the test of time. There are some Palpatine blues out there, but mainly what we're seeing is Palpatine yellow. That is what you're typically seeing. Palpatine yellow is a little bit more, favored just because of the uniqueness of it. But like I said, there's still Palpatine like Colossus running out there because you do draw a lot of cards. You can play that controlling style. Overall, I mean, I think Palpatine, and in terms of results, actually has performed better than some of the A tier options. And Palpatine Yellow actually does still do some good work, especially with the new cards like Garindin, being able to pick apart people's hands. You got Thrawn in there that actually does some decent work. You've got, like I said, Palpatine Colossus, which is just kind of like the ultimate high-end version of the Command Vigilance Villainy control, because you start to take, big units from your opponent, and that can be absolutely devastating. But you got to reach there. But overall, his performance and overall him as a leader, well, I think he's earned an A tier. The very first video I've ever made, by the way, as I'm recording this, it's been 4 years since I started making videos on YouTube, but it's to the day, by the way. But Leia, first video for this channel, and it was an absolute blast. It's still an absolutely fantastic leader. We got a bunch of new rebels from the new set, and from kind of honestly a few of the other sets recently that has continuously kind of bumped Leia back up into the B tier. Not from like, to the A or S tier or anything like that, but she's kind of held on to that like solid B tier spot. She's a very aggressive deck, action cheats. All of these things are still what she does. She has a reasonably deploy, 3/6 with raid 1, similar to Sabe in that stat line. But having that action cheating is still relevant and can really rush people down. Target's down, still a good base, even though it's not as common. So yeah, Leia, B tier. Holdo is next, and we've got to immediately drop this lady into the D tier. We've got a leader that purely works off resistance cards, and, well, there's not a whole lot of resistance cards that you want to be putting in your deck to take advantage of and do some good work. So, if you have a leader that's purely based off resistance cards, and then, well, you don't have really a whole lot of resistance cards you want to play, and then you've got a little bit of a later deploy, and then you don't have the way to recover, and then it's supposed to be like aggressively situated because you use resources to get +2/+2, but then the Command Heroism Vigilance style, or even if you're playing other version, but like Command Heroism tends to be a little bit more mid-range, less controlling. Yeah, that's a bad combination, and you end up in D tier. A fan favorite for sure, we've got Vader up next, and this one really only has the one deck attached to it, which is Vader Yellow, but the leader overall has been pretty powerful. We did get a few new additions, a couple early plays potentially for Vader, and more importantly, a couple of events that were a little bit interesting in the new set, and he still does some good work. He's still the solid, I'm going to go all space, and I'm going to ignore everything that you're doing, and, kind of just hit face. Here's where it gets a little bit interesting, because technically Vader has performed better than any of the leaders in A tier. However, there's less versatility and more of a straightforward game plan and less options. So I'm going to slide him just underneath kind of a couple of these A tier options. So even though technically Vader has had 1 to 2 leaders more placed in the top 8 of the PQs that we've seen so far, Vader has less versatility, more streamlined game plan, much easier to counter, and a lot less creativity regarding it. So I think, and even though it's not like crazy with Kylo Ren or anything, I think he is just a little bit below than the other leaders, in my opinion. Morgan Elspeth. I don't think I've ever made a video on this one, actually. And that should show you kind of where she's going to end up. There's a few leaders down here that I have yet to make a video on. I think I have yet to make a video on Holdo. And I also think I've yet to make a video on Ahsoka. So yeah, Morgan Elspeth going to end up in the D tier as well. The problem with Elspeth is that she requires way too many actions to get her ability to go. So you need to play a unit with a keyword. Then you need to, well, use your action to choose a friendly unit, right? So that the unit needs to be living. But then that unit also had to have attacked this turn, okay? So you need to have a keyword that matches another keyword in your hand. You need to have that unit attack. And then you need to have it to live to your next action to use your action to get a discount. That's way too many things. If this said, action, you may play a card that matches a keyword, unit with a keyword on the board for 1 less, it would be a little bit more interesting. I don't think it would be like broken by any means, but I also don't think it would be that much higher. I think it would see out more in the C tier, but there's so many actions that require you to kind of set up for this And it's just like unplayable. Like there's so many times where your opponent just kills the keyworded unit because they're like, ah, yeah, if I don't kill, they're probably gonna get a discount. I don't really want them to get a discount right now. So yeah, Elspeth, D tier. The next one we've got is Jabba the Hutt. This one from set 2 with the bounty mechanics. This one has been, always one that I hoped for, but similar to Morgan Elspeth, which you just talked about, this one also requires some actions, right? So you have to use your action to put a bounty on something, which that's the first thing you have to do. And then you have to attack to kill that unit to claim the bounty, and then you play your card for cheaper, right? This is super telegraphed, right? Because you've put a bounty on a unit, so your opponent knows that that's the unit that you want to kill. Therefore, they can attack the other units that may have not attacked already, or maybe just, bounce their own unit, or just kill the unit that you plan on attacking with, and then kind of remove the ability with Jabba. If we had more bounty support, I think this could be a little bit more of an interesting one, but he's just gotten worse and worse and worse and worse as time has gone on because there's no more bounty support. And honestly, there's just been other cards that have made a lot of other decks that much more powerful. So he's going to end up in the kind of lower end of C tier. For our next one, we've got an old classic in Grand Moff Tarkin. Now, this one has gotten a few more Imperial units, like Imperial Dark Trooper, for example, in the recent sets. This one's never been bad. There was a period of time where he was like in the A and S tier category in set 2 when you had like the Tarkin Yellow with Triple Dark Raid. But as soon as set 3 came out, you had more options for Triple Dark Raid options. So Tarkin definitely fell off at that point. And then now you don't have Triple Dark Raid, which is unfortunate, but you still have the same kind of similarities where you could still play space with Imperial units and get like Imperial, oh my gosh. I want to say Phantom Tie, but I don't even remember if that's the name off the top of my head because I haven't seen it in a while. But with your Tarkin, you could still do some Lurking Tie Phantom. That's what it is. You could still do some cool things and mess around with Imperial units and get the experience token and kind of out game plan your opponents. I've liked Tarkin Blue lately because you can go with emergency powers and really go double down on all your experience tokens and go Imperial and things like that. Definitely not bad. Definitely, honestly, I'm going to keep him right where he is. Very low B tier. Just okay. Grand Moff Tarkin has never managed to do anything in my eyes. This guy, very, very weak ability, giving you some bonuses for very cheap units, but then only allowing you to attack units for that attack and getting the bonus there rather than just taking base or units. I mean, that is just horrible, 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 especially if you're trying to play like a go wide strategy. You want to be able to attack base. Same thing with his leader flip. It just doesn't do a whole lot in general. I mean, you do get a little bit of a power bump, right? An overwhelm, which, it can work with some of your smaller units, right? Because remember, it only works with 3 or less cost, but it still only applies to units that you're attacking. So if this was to any attack, like anytime you attack, you get this effect, and right, and if you were to give it to itself, maybe you have something, but gonna be a very low C tier. Honestly, could argue for a D tier. Next up, we've got Hera Syndulla. Man, a leader that slowly has been getting more and more cards that are a little bit more exciting for her, right? As soon as we saw Sabine's Masterpiece, we were kind of excited. We were getting into the stage where we're going to have like Zeb Aurelio's double aspect, and then she's going to rotate out and we're not even going to be able to use it. So that's unfortunate. I do think she's slowly gotten just a little bit better. If you compare these directly to like Nala Se, for example, they have very similar abilities, but one's Spectres and the other one's Clones. Clones are a lot weaker than a lot of the Spectres out there. And the Spectres work with each other, which is interesting. So I don't think Hera's particularly strong or anything like that, but I do think the Spectres and building towards them isn't like a terrible game plan like I think Clones are. So I'm going to put Hera slightly above in the very end of C tier. Next up, we've got Yularen, which honestly has been a little bit of a disappointing leader for me. I thought he was going to be kind of solidly in the B tier category, but he ends up performing a little bit weaker than that. I think just the action cheating isn't as good without as synergistic of a tribe like Leia's, right, with Rebels, because it's kind of like a Leia action that you have, but with the Imperial side of things. You have a decent, size on the deploy. You can do the action cheating and everything like that. That's all something that you can do. There's just a lot less synergy associated with it. Like, you don't have the cards like Rebel Assault and K2 and General Dodonna and Fleet Lieutenant that you do with Leia. You can play aggression. You do get some cards that work with that game plan, but overall, it's just a lot weaker. It's a lot weaker. And if Leia's in B tier, I got to put Yularen. Honestly, I think he's actually just worse than Yeah, he's like a mid to high C tier option. Next up, we've got kind of what I consider to be better Tarkin, and that is Snoke. So Snoke, very, very similar to Thrawn's ability, where you pay 1 to give an experience token to something. The difference is that Snoke's is restrictive based on you can only do it to the highest power, and it has to be a ability unit. Tarkin's restricted because it has to be Imperial only. Now, I think Snoke's is a lot better because you do not have as harsh of a restriction. In the earlier days of Star Wars Unlimited, I would have said that, Snoke's is probably worse because there's so many Imperials. But as we've started to expand our sets, there's less Imperials. And so you have a lot more versatility with Snoke's ability, and actually does some decent work, especially if you get Snoke down. He can be a one-man win con because he can put the experience token on himself, whereas Tarkin can't actually do that. I think that's actually also a very big mark against Tarkin. So we're going to put him slightly higher. Again, not that I think he's incredibly strong, but a little bit better of a Tarkin. And our very first leader that is not part of one of the main sets, we've got Leia Organa. Now, for this one, I'm actually going to read it off because I feel like most people won't even know what the heck this Leia even does. So she is a pay 1 to heal 1 damage from a friendly unit. So it's a 1 cost action to heal 1 damage. Okay. She's a 5 to flip leader, 3/7. And then on attack, you can heal 1 damage from a friendly unit and 1 damage from another friendly unit. So let's talk about that front side action. It is horrible. I mean, Obi-Wan's front side action isn't even that great, but you're paying 1 resource for Leia's? Then you have a 5 to deploy 3/7, which isn't like incredible. That heals you 1 damage across a couple units. Oh my gosh. I mean, whoo, that's bad. It's bad. I'm going to be honest, this one is bad. And this is part of the reason why I didn't want to include these ones. But, we'll talk about the other one later. Dryden Voss, probably the biggest sadness that I have with the new set, because I was really, really excited about this leader. He actually did perform pretty well in my early testing, but the meta shifted towards a direction that I think really does not favor Dryden. And so he ends up being a lot weaker than I was hoping. His overall game plan and his, value of like discarding some cards, maybe using Anakin as well, and getting some ambushing out is quite strong still. So I don't think he's like below B tier. But he's definitely not in the A or S tier category, and he's definitely on the lower end. There are some, like I said, powerful things you can do, like discarding Luke Skywalker to ambush out something, and then following that up, playing Palpatine's your turn to return the Luke Skywalker to the battlefield, right? So you get to play Luke Skywalker, you get to ambush out something, and then maybe you ambush out like Anakin Skywalker or something that gets, -6 across 2 units. I mean, that can be very powerful. You got some really powerful things you can potentially do, but it's a little bit inconsistent. So going to be around the kind of middle of the pack B tier. And next up, we've got another leader that is really built around Unity of Purpose in Mon Mothma. So of the leaders that we talked about with Unity of Purpose, we've got Wat Tambor, Bail Organa, Captain Rex. These 3 leaders are the most commonly used Unity of Purpose leaders alongside Mon Mothma. And I think Mon Mothma is actually the strongest of the 4. And the main reason for that is similar to what Captain Rex does, is you get this +0/+1 to your other units, which is actually secretly really strong when you're playing a Unity of Purpose deck. But the other part about this is that you do get a lot of these random officials because you can play out of aspect that are really, really solid alongside all the normal units that you could play with Captain Rex. So you get to play weird ones like Chancellor Palpatine, for example, and that can really work well with tokens. But you also have a 3/7 deploy leader, so it's actually just really tanky. And oftentimes the extra clone trooper that you get from Captain Rex is not the difference maker in terms of Unity of Purpose winning. It's making all your other unique units survive, because you probably already have a clone trooper token down already. So overall, I mean, you have some really good officials that you could play, especially like Outspoken Representative or some of the other Vigilance, officials that you got with the new set, that make it really awkward for your opponent to actually kill you or kill your other units, right? That Sentinel becomes extremely important when you're trying to get a big board with Unity of Purpose. And Mon Mothma just does it better. And I think she's honestly, a solid B tier option because of it. Or a solid, low B tier option because of it. Avar Kriss is next, and a leader that is the biggest to deploy leader in the game. 9 to deploy leader. Definitely one that a lot of people were high on for a long time, but one that I was always a little bit not convinced by. And to be honest, it's not like she's gotten better. There really isn't a whole lot of leaders that you're really looking to, or new cards that you're really looking to combo with Avar, especially since one of the main mechanics was plot, and you have a 9 to deploy leader. So You have to use the 4-star to deploy earlier. So now you're deploying on like 7 or 8 resources, and most of the plot cards just aren't worth playing on that point of the game. So she doesn't really get anything from the new set, and her overall game plan, while it can be decent in terms of like playing a bunch of big force units in high value mid-range style, you don't have an early enough to deploy leader to support the strategy as well as something like a Yoda would, or something like a Rey would, right? So that's what harms her. So she's going to end up in the C tier category as well, kind of in the middle of the pack. In the next spot, we've got Boba Fett from set 2. One of the Boba Fett's that never really got his time to shine, and really still does not. I do think he got a couple of cool things. Like, I think Figure of Unity actually does work well in Boba Fett, and a couple of cards with keywords do work well in Boba Fett, but nothing particularly good enough to really rise him out of the ashes of where he's at, which is in a solid kind of C tier position. You got a lot of keywords. They can really rush people down and do some good work in that regard. But there's nothing particularly strong about Boba Fett. And oftentimes what ends up happening is you want to play your unit to get the keyword bonus before you attack. And then that allows your opponent to actually interact with your unit before you attack. And if they do, then your unit dies and you don't get any damage in, which is a really, really bad thing. Like if this said, when you play a unit that has 1 or more keywords, you can give something +1/+0 and immediately attack with it, this actually might be a good leader. But it's not. So, C tier. In our next one, we've got, or for the next one, we've got Wedge Antilles. This is a leader that I really, really wanted to run back for this set, because we've got a lot of these mid-range style of decks that, in some cases, if you deploy a Chewbacca and stuff, you just win the game. And that's what Wedge is all about, right? Getting those really early pilots on units and trying to kind of just winning the game extremely quickly. This deck can have some of the most explosive starts that you have ever seen. You know, something like turn 1, deploy your entire hand, right? Cartel Turncoat, maybe 2 Cartel Turncoats, or Wolfpack Escort into R2 plus a 1-cost pilot, and suddenly you got 0 cards in hand and you've got everything on board. I mean, that is an explosive start. That is potentially 7 power on turn 1. On turn 1. Then you can follow that up with all manner of other cards following and do some work there. So this one, very explosive, but it's also kind of one-trick pony-esque, where a single disruptive spell, you're running out of cards, you're running out of value, you can't actually close out the game, and that's the problem with Wedge. So, you know, honestly, he's very disruptible, so I got to put him at like the mid to low C tier, and that's what's holding him back. All right, had to do a quick zoom out because we're getting a lot of leaders in here, but we've got Admiral Piet next. This one has been very impressive, guys. We've got some new additions in the new sets. Gonk Power Droid, Fulminatrix. Just having another capital ship that actually interacts with your opponent's units is just good. And the fact that you can, essentially, when you deploy Piet, play massive ships is kind of gross. Like, if you have Gonk Power Droid, when you deploy Piet, that is a turn 4 Devastator. Let's say you go Gonk Droid into Super Laser Technician or like Resupply, and your opponent doesn't have an answer for that, right? You can do, and this is crazy, a turn 3 Devastator. That's insane. Like, that is insane. And then you can just follow up by doing that every single turn because of Piet's ability to just reduce the ship cost. So this guy's good. He's at S tier. Piet has been performing very, very well. So as of right now, he is like a top 6 list in the format, top 5, top 6. He's going to get an S tier for me. He's going to get an S tier. And then, of course, we can follow up that S tier with probably my most hated leader in the game, Hunter. D tier guy. He's late to deploy. He has an action that is the most convoluted draw card you have ever seen in your life. And then even when he deploys, he still has a weaker stat line than most of the other deploys that are really, really strong. What are we doing, man? What are we even doing with Hunter? Like, what is even the point? D tier. Obi-Wan is one that I'm pretty excited about post-rotation, but as of the current moment, kind of just sitting in that middle of the pack. He has a powerful leader ability where you can really outpace your opponent's unit size, and that can give you really nice value trades as you're going along. The problem with that is, well, it requires, multiple actions in a turn, so you oftentimes don't have initiative. And then sometimes, your opponent can just get on board early, knock out your units, and you can't generate the force, and you can't use Obi-Wan's action. Then you're left with a 3/6/5 deploy leader, which is not that great. So if you get on, get rolling, you can do some cool things. If you don't, it can kind of be weak. I think with the new rotation, he's going to really shine. I'm going to put him in the B tier. And lastly, in the command category, we've got Count Dooku. Now, Count Dooku is the only exploit leader that I think truly has something going for him. Right? We have like a couple of these leaders that are like wanting to be that direction of an exploit leader. Like Newt Gunray, for example. But this one gives you exploit to cards that don't normally have it. And that's really important because cards that have exploit, for some reason, FFG thought it was a good idea to not only make it hard for you to, set up exploit, but then also make it so that those exploit payoffs are way overcosted so that when you discount them, they're basically playing a normal card. Count Dooku circumvents that by giving exploit to cards that are in the separatist area. He can actually be pretty powerful. I'm going to leave him where he is at the very bottom of B tier because I do think if you get a nice hand with Invisible Hand, for example, that can be completely devastating. And one of the few all Vulture Droid decks that is actually pretty good. Next one is one of two showcases that I have, and that is Cassian Andor. Now, this one was pretty exciting, and I do think he's got some powerful abilities, and I do think he is going to be kind of the go-to aggro option, maybe in the future. However, aggro isn't really something that's like super strong right now. And then more specifically, Cassian, he just doesn't do enough to outpace all the huge value that the Command Heroism decks get, especially since you want to be playing Data Vault instead of ECL, and you want to be able to get to the 6 deploy leader. And by that time, you're just getting completely overrun with extreme value. But, still, like I said, one of the few showcases that I have, one of two, and he is decent. He has not performed really any feats yet in the meta, but I'm going to put him solidly in kind of like the middle of the pack B tier. Next up, we've got a go wide leader in Ahsoka, a little bit more of an aggro deck as well. This one really has never done anything. The 5/6 can be strong if you're able to get the 3 units down, including herself, but overall, I mean, just the in general effectiveness of Ahsoka has been pretty on the weaker side, and her action to maybe get a point of damage extra here and there, requiring you to have coordinate. Ooh. I mean, this is just like a worse IG-88 ability, which is really not favorable towards Ahsoka. So she's going to end up in like the lower end of C tier. Arinda Price is next up, and this one is a very interesting leader. I've tried a lot of strategies, and she can get to a very, very large amount of power. You can have Arinda Price where you deploy Arinda, and you've got the 2 battle droid tokens, you put Palpatine down, maybe you put 2 Palpatines down, you got other tokens already on the battlefield, you get an attack in, and suddenly you've got Palpatine with 4 spy tokens, 2 battle droid tokens, another spy token that you just generated. That's at least 7 tokens, plus maybe a token here or there, and she's sitting at, 11 or 12 power. That could be pretty good. Here's the problem with that. She's 6 to deploy. So if you're running a 24 HP base, you just get killed. And she's also a 4/6 naturally. And even if you are generating spy tokens, it's so late in the game that it's probably not relevant. Lots of downsides for her. I'm actually going to put her in the C tier. Her front side action of being able to ready up a token unit can be interesting with some of the like TIE Fighter tokens plus pilots, but maybe we'll see some extra payouts for her in the future. We've got Maul as the next option for us on this list. This is OG Maul from set 2. The one that is gives you overwhelm to some units, which never really has done anything, to be honest, guys. I mean, this is pretty bad. You've got a 6/6 leader deploy, which is kind of cool. 6/6 for 6, right? 6/6, lots of 6s. Cool overwhelming barrage target, high power. I mean, all that's cool, but this front side action just does absolutely nothing. Did I say set 2? It is. I don't even remember. Is this set 2 or set 3? Oh my gosh, it's been so long since I played with Maul. But anyways, 6/6 for 6 just isn't actually strong enough. And his front side action does nothing for you. Like, you're never overwhelming through like 2 4s or 2 5s and actually getting a good trade in. Because you oftentimes trying to hit base. Not that fantastic. I've tried even a Maul blue list lately where you go like emergency powers and then try to use the overwhelm that way. Still not good. So he's going to end up very, very low on the C tier. So Bossk kind of hung in there as one of those leaders that is always surprisingly good. And nothing has really changed. In fact, some of the bounty cards that we were usually running in like Boss Screen in the past have now been shifted over and played in other decks as well, because the bounty cards themselves are very strong, and being able to deal 1 damage to units that have been given a bounty or double claiming them is immensely powerful. Like Price on Your Head, or more importantly, Bounty Hunter's Quarry is absolutely fantastic. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with Bosk. Bosk Data Vault is still very strong. This is one that doesn't have a lot of representation, but I think it's just because it's not popular. You do have a top 8ing from Bosk. So immediately that kind of puts him in the top echelons of like top of the A tier category. And I think that's where he earned his spot. Pre-Vizsla, I'll always have a soft spot for this guy because of the aggressive negotiations, and because the opponent or the player that actually took Pre-Vizsla Galactic Championship and getting the top 64 was playing right next to me in my final round when I got eliminated. And so Pre-Vizsla Blue, very, very fun. I do think he actually got a lot better with aggressive negotiations. I mean, there are some crazy things you can do with this, because you have a whole strategy around drawing you cards. And then, of course, because you draw cards, you get a 6/6 for 5. And then you get, the ability to potentially deal a bunch of damage with your action, although I don't think that's all that relevant because you don't really use the action all that much. So really, it's all about just the fact that you get a bigger leader and you can kind of close out the game much quicker. This guy, not bad. High C tier. Next up, we've got Darth Maul. So not Maul, but Darth Maul, the Force version. This one has always been somewhat interesting, especially with like Version's Temple, giving you access to immediately start using his ability every single turn. And, there's a lot of cards in Darth Maul's repertoire, like Ogdo Bogdo, similar to Asajj, where you want to damage them as well. So that can be pretty useful. Remember, if your opponent has 2 units in the battlefield, you just keep dealing 1 damage to each of them, and that can really put a huge damper on things. I mean, this guy can hard counter some lists. Like up against Vader Yellow, this guy's a nightmare, because they kill your first 2 turn plays. And even if you do get an attack in, suddenly all your tokens are dying. So like your Clone Combat Squadron doesn't do a whole lot. Your Victor Leader doesn't do a whole lot. And you just slowly get whittled and whittled down by Darth Maul. So there are some matchups that are actually really, really good for Darth Maul. And he has some, angle that he attacks on that's kind of different than a lot of others. So I think he earns like a solid low B tier position on the list. And for the next one, we've got a fun one. That is Darth Vader. But the reason why it's fun is this is the Hoth starter set Vader. So we've got a lot of Vaders in the game. We have 3 leaders to be exact, and many units. But this one in particular is very aggressive. So kind of as an opposite to Leia, instead of paying 1 resource to heal you or heal a unit, you could pay 1 resource to deal 1 damage to a base. So very, very direct damage sort of burn. We've got a deploy for, 6. He's a 3/8, but he deals 2 damage on attack to a base. Honestly, it's not the worst. It's not great, okay? But I don't think he's worse than C tier. I've played a lot of games up against this one because people try to make this one work. And he actually isn't that bad. The ability to choose to deal just immense damage straight to the base, don't even have to worry about Sentinels or anything like that, is strong. And if you go that route, you play Ruthless Raider, Devastators, Daring Raids, that type of game plan, it does some work. So to me, again, not particularly like amazing, but like low C tier. Another leader that's gotten a lot better from the new set is Cassian. Now, similar to Pre-Vizsla, one of the biggest cards for this deck is aggressive negotiations. Now, you do get a lot of other cards that are really good, like Charismatic, for example, but aggressive negotiations is like the card for Cassian, because the whole game plan of Cassian is just draw a bunch of cards. And I cannot tell you, when I played Cassian, I mean, this guy is insane. You are hitting aggressive negotiations for like 13 or 14 damage. That is insane for Cassian, especially if you're playing, the Force-based version. You don't have to, but if you're playing the Force-based version, you got Kiadi to draw you a bunch of cards as well. I mean, this gets out of hand very, very quickly for Cassian. But aggressive negotiations has absolutely put this guy on the board in terms of not being a D tier leader. So I'm going to put him solidly in the C tier category. He does actually have an ability that has a specific combo with one of the new cards, but it's inconsistent. So C tier. Another leader that just feels like they've got a million new additions every single set that comes out in Grand Inquisitor. Now, this one always is one that has a soft spot for me too, in that, you load up, you just start beating face, and you just start killing people. You ready up units, you attack. You ready up units, you attack. You don't care about your opponents and interacting with their units at all, really. And you did get some cool ones like Dryden, Voss, for example, which can do some insane things. But also just some solid plays overall that work well with his ability. Darth Treya and Grand Inquisitor Blue is now an infinite combo, so it's not like I don't think that card or that combo is actually like meta, but it is an infinite combo that is actually able to be played. I think Grand Inquisitor has always been just like a solid B tier option. Very, very aggressive. If you're not ready for it, you will get absolutely trounced, especially against those space strategies. I mean, Grand Inquisitor races extremely fast, and so if you are not ready for it, you will get dominated. IG-88's up next, and this one was an interesting one because unlike, some of the other go-wide options that we talked about, like Mon Mothma or Bale, this one is a go-wide option that does not utilize the Unity of Purpose, and instead uses some other group-wide pump effects, but just puts a bunch of units down with Raid 1 with AG. It just goes to town. It just goes to town. And honestly, it's been a lot better. Like, I think I've put IG maybe in D tier or C tier in every single tier list. And I'm not changing that. It's going to be in C tier. But it's going to be at least in the higher end of C tier, okay? I actually think it's not bad with like Sudden Ferocity and Chancellor Palpatine. These are great new additions for it. You've got a lot of one-drops that are in this new set that are actually perfect, like Corrupt Politician, or even like the 2-drop that creates a spy token when it dies. Like, those types of cards are perfect for a go-wide strategy, and it really does make IG a lot stronger. And I played a lot of IG this rotation or this set because, I've noticed he's gotten a lot better since he used to be. And finally, we reach a leader that from set 1 has been very powerful, and that is Sabine Wren. So Sabine is very, very interesting because right now, normally every single set tier list she's been here. Every single one. In this set, there is an argument that she shouldn't be. She is just under Piet in terms of effectiveness overall. In terms of, overall top finishes, right? And technically, if you were to combine certain leaders, in terms of like the leader and base or leaders in top combination, she's sitting at like 7th, 8th position. So I think she still warrants an S tier, but there is an argument that you should be putting her in the top of A tier. And that just goes to show you how truly, truly powerful these stalling mechanisms and the ability to create so much healing and value that we have in the game at the current moment. That just goes to show you how much it is. Because Sabine was always top 3, and was even considered to be in the A tier. Like, you wouldn't, if you made that argument, people would think you're crazy. But right now, there is an argument for it. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone were to try to go in the comment section and argue, well, I think Sabine's actually an A tier option. I can understand that. OG Vader is the next one on the list. And this one's always fun for me because I always have fond memories of bringing this guy to a store showdown and playing Vader Blue back in set 1. Back when my locals actually had a bunch of players to play. This is what I would bring. And yes, I was the most hated players. And now, you see me complaining about control decks on the video. So, I was part of the problem. Okay. I was part of the problem. I do think that that back in set 1, set 2, especially in set 1, there was so much less removal options that you actually had a lot more decision making to have. Whereas now it's like so much in depth. Like, this was before Fell the Dragon, Rivals Fall, and those types of cards, right? Like, this was before that. Before, all those crazy additions. No Glory didn't exist. You played a lot of cards to actually fight your opponent. And of course, there was Vader Yellow that exists. Nowadays, or a Vader Green that exists. He's still good. There's still some ramp angles that you can take. There's still Vader Blues angles that you can take. I think the leader ability is quite powerful. You could do like turn 1, First Order Stormtrooper, or and use the action, or Notice Integrations ends up being a 4-cost removal option that kills anything. So there's very, very strong things you can use with his action. And then his leader deploy is very, very dominant if you can keep it on the board for a couple of actions. He's going to be kind of in that mid to low tier B. option. So Luthen is one of the brand new additions with the new set, and honestly, I was pretty excited about this guy. Very, very interesting things you can do with like heroic sacrifice, especially like K2SO, getting access to a bunch of additional damage when your units are dying. I really feel like this would be a lot more interesting if this was like anytime a unit died, period. I know that's like just really strong. Like I think that would be quite strong. But the fact that your unit has to be attacking, or maybe it was just like if a unit died while in combat, that could be an interesting. But because you have to attack units, it kind of it doesn't support the gameplay that you want to be doing as an aggro deck, which is hit face. And then you got a 2/7, which doesn't put a lot of power on the board to close out the game. So he's actually a lot weaker than I was hoping for. And even though I think Luthen still has a lot of potential, especially when rotation hits, I'm going to put him, at the bottom end of B tier, to be honest. I don't think he's quite in the C tier category, but certainly a lot less impressive than I was hoping for. Oh, joy. Oh, joy. Follow that up with one of the worst leaders in the entire game. Guys, we're not going to waste any more time on this. I actually think Rey is literally the worst leader in the game. I joke a lot about Hunter and like some other cards, but I legitimately think that Rey trying to build a deck that's like utilizing these force events and like putting more in your deck to make Rey work is just so bad. She has a decent leader stat line, right? But that's all she has. Her action on the flip side doesn't really synergize with the rest of the deck, right? Because you're playing a force-based deck, probably with the force base, probably with cards like Kiadi Mundi, because you want to draw cards into more force events. And then, you have a lot of cards in hand to try to, promote aggressive negotiations, things like that. And then, they want you to be empty-handed to get a lot of value out of Rey to deploy. And then you also, only get 1 damage ping if you're playing a force. Sorry. Definitely one of the best leaders in the entire game at the current moment, Anakin Skywalker. We're going to put him at the top of S tier right now because I do find him to be performing just a little bit better than your Yodas in terms of overall dominance over certain styles of decks. And although Yoda has the option to go with potentially a couple of different options like Yoda Red and Yoda Green, it's like 99% Yoda Green. So even though I was talking earlier about like, Kylo Ren and Palpatine have some different creativity and options, it's kind of similar in that like Yoda has a little bit, but not really a whole lot. Anakin is it's just more dominant. It is definitely more dominant when you're playing the list. And in terms of actual wins, of PQs, Anakin is number 1 right now. He's literally number 1, followed up by Yoda. So that's something to kind of pay attention to. And so in conjunction with a lot of top 8. So it's both. The ability to, get all these additional units like Mina Bonteri and Captain Typho, but then give them an immediate 2 power when needed to kill off a unit is so devastatingly strong. You have a lot of HP on your base with data falls. You end up being in a situation where your Anakin's like 6, 7, 8 power when he comes down. So he ends the game or becomes a huge board controlling threat. But then on top of that all, you have some major ways to just kind of disrupt your opponent's gameplay by having every single unit be a threat on your board. And that is massive. He is an absolute S tier. For our next one, we've got Third Sister, another leader that has really never kind of done anything in the game. I'm always slightly, excited about her, and then she only kind of just slightly underperforms. Nothing too crazy about her. Nothing that I'm like, ooh, this is extremely powerful. The ability to not get attacked when she comes down is relevant, and she does have a aggressive stat line, but she still does die to takedowns and open fire, similar to IG-88. But the problem with her is that you're not in this go wide strategy that, you can really benefit from. And so you don't have this like fallback routine where, they might be able to kill IG-88, but you have a million units on the board because of the direction you wanted to go. Yes, you can run that style in Third Sister, but then you're in a weaker game plan because your overall deck just works a little bit worse because IG at least gives you the bonus power when you attack. So Third Sister is kind of in this awkward spot. In the past, before set 6, I would have put Third Sister above IG, but now we're going to put her below. Not that she's horrible or anything like that. She just has nothing really
going for her. On the opposite side of things, we've got Daedra. And Daedra, a brand new card in the set, and actually has put up some results. Nothing crazy, but still puts up some results. The strength of Daedra has really been Daedra blue for the most part. And people are just playing it as this massive hard control deck. But the nice thing about her is that she deploys very early to prevent some really aggressive strategies. You have this ability to draw a bunch of cards, or you're just dealing 2 damage to things. So like each one is extremely relevant for a very, very hard control deck, which is exactly what you're trying to do with Daedra anyways. And so everything kind of fits in the game plan. And she attacks at a different angle than your like Kylo Rens and Aidens and Kiras, because she's aggression. So you have different things to play with, like Devastator, for example, which is a really nice addition in the late game. So a lot different than some other controlling leaders, but actually performs pretty well. I've got to put her... Oh, this one's tough. I think I'm going to put her at the top of B tier, but maybe we'll swap that. For our next one, we've got one of my least liked leaders, and a lot of you know it, because I always am talking about why the heck did this guy become a 1/6? What was going through FFG's mind when they were making this leader? What is the point of even making a leader if you're going to give it 1 power? In the best case scenario, you get a 3/6 deploy. You have an interesting action to do, pay 1 to deal 2 damage to a unit, which, we just talked about Daedra, can be strong, but you're not really in the same game plan where you can draw a bunch of cards. You're not in Vigilance Villainies, or so you can't really leverage that. Strength of cards. This guy is bad, but the front side action is a redeeming factor. So we're going to put him in C tier. Okay? That's it for that one. Mace Windu, definitely a leader that a lot of people chose as their pet deck. We saw a lot of Mace Windu blue just occasionally pop up. And I say a lot, but I mean, like, it was the most consistent leader that was kind of like in that really low tier style of deck that would consistently pop up here and there as that like weird finish, the weird finisher. This guy does do some decent work. You can't combo his action to, kind of finish off units with some direct damage, which is useful. You do have ways to really wipe the board with Mace Windu. I think Top of the Summon is an interesting addition for Mace Windu. You have other cards that are good with his action and overall game plan, like Double Red Mace Windu, but he still isn't that great. And I'm gonna have to put him definitely in the lower end of C tier. Next up, we've got Poe Dameron, which made a pretty big surge in the previous set, and he's nowhere to be found anymore. I think that's really mainly because you have, like, for example, Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi Starfighter, just completely wrecks your strategy. Like, just completely ruins it. Like, you just lose. It is so brutal. Absolutely brutal. So when you have, like, things like that can happen, playing these decks that are really all in on a single strategy is really, really tough. That said, I still think he is solidly in the B tier category. You can have a very, very aggressive game plan with him and do some solid rush downs. And I think that's, if you can catch a few decks off guard, that puts you kind of in the B tier category and gives you a couple of wins. Next up, we're going to have a leader that I will miss. Because this is a leader that always brings a smile to my face by winning games extremely quickly. I mean, there is nothing like a Kylo Ren win the game on turn 3 where you're rushing down your opponent, but it's a very one-trick-esque where, if the opponent has a little bit of disruption and gets that stuff in, it can completely decimate your strategy, especially if they drop like a Captain Typho. Oh, man. I haven't played Kylo Ren up against a lot of Captain Typhos because I haven't played a ton in set 6, but let's just say I don't want to, okay? I don't want to. So Kylo always has that potential to do something crazy, definitely in the B tier category, but always extremely inconsistent. There are some matchups where you just completely dominate, and then some matchups where you get completely dominated. So, B tier. Next up, we've got a leader that actually has performed decently well still, even after the new set. This guy was definitely at the top of set 5. And before rotation or before bannings and after bannings, all very, very, very solid performances for Boba Green. But, the overall Boba Fett list these days really the indirect damage when you're dealing with such high toughness and ground units that normally wouldn't do a whole crazy a lot against you. It's pretty awkward to, play that style up against, Anakins and Yodas, where you have so much toughness to deal with. So a lot of the indirect damage isn't as effective as before. That said, still very, very aggressive, still a solid list, and overall has performed decently well. Is up there, kind of in this section where the top of the A tier based on performance and overall viability. Next is a leader that I was really, really hoping good things from because of the new set with like Cinta, Cass, and things like that, but really just hasn't done a whole lot in this set, and that is Luke. Luke, he's had like that occasional top finish, still performs well, still is a strong deck, but not nearly as impressive as I was hoping he would be. So he makes his way solidly into kind of that top of B tier category, and has some power to him in terms of like really being able to decimate a board once you get the deployed pilot on, and that could be decently strong. But overall, hasn't performed nearly to what we were hoping for. And it can be a little bit tricky, especially with like Hyperspace Disaster in the meta and lots of, very, very powerful units that can interact with your space units. Yeah, Luke struggles. Bo-Katan, one of my favorite leaders to play here and there as just kind of a fun little option. We've got, the Mandalorian tribe has had here and there a few new additions, but nothing really to make it like a truly solid list. She was kind of hanging on to the B tier for a little while there, but I think she's solidified herself into the C tier category. Kind of reminds me of just like you're playing like a very weak tribal deck, and probably even put it lower. Very, very weak tribal deck with Mandalorians, but your payoff is this 1 damage ping. And if you're trying to do the 1 damage ping thing, oftentimes you have a lot of other better options, and you don't have to play as weak of a tribe to do so, which is the Mandalorian. And for our next one, we've got Captain Phasma, certainly one that people have on their radar with a recent win from Captain Phasma in PQs. One of those weird decks, and we're going to see a few of them here and there, like I mentioned. Like Darth Maul has finished a PQ and won it. Fennec Shand has won one, spoiler alert. And Phasma has won one. Because people bring their pet decks to smaller PQs or maybe like a mid-sized PQ. And I think this was more of a mid-sized PQ. And they just perform well. They bring a deck that they really like. And, honestly, a lot of these decks, even in the C tier category, they can still win if you play them very well. And that's kind of what happened. Now, I do think Phasma is not a C tier list. I think with the addition of FN Trooper and, Knight of Ren from like the previous set and things like that, you actually have a decent list. It's solid. And you have very, very high synergy with first order units. So it's not like she's incredible, but I'm going to put her at the bottom of B tier. That's where I'll put Phasma for now. Major Von Rag is next, and I actually just got done before I recorded this video, or started recording this video, so I guess not just done because I'm recording for like 3 hours now. But Major Von Rag absolutely slapped me. I mean, there's some cool things you can do with Major Von Rag, putting a bunch of space units down, powering up your other space units. Kind of has a similar problem to the Boba 2, where, you don't really want to play a unit before you attack because then you have a chance of not losing out on all the damage. But in order to get the value from Von Rag, you do have to play your unit before you attack. So that's not exactly something you want in a aggro leader. But it can still do some really cool things. In my case, I have my opponent playing Vulture Droids. So, that was something. But I want to put him solidly kind of around the same mark as Boba Fett. You have a very similar, game plan in that you put down units, you power up your other units, and try to get value from that. Boba Fett has a little bit more of a go bigger strategy, and Von Rag's a lot more aggressive, seeing as their leader deploys kind of match that. So they have a little bit of a different finishing game plan, but their problems are still very similar in that you really, really don't like how you have to play these out. And then the payoff just isn't super high. And for the last card in the aggression category, we've got Han 2. This one's interesting because this is by far the most versatile leader in the S tier. Yes, he's an S tier. By far, in terms of actual performance overall, this is the number 4 deck, right? In terms of like top 8 finishes from just the leader and base.
But you have like Han ECL. Then you have Han 2 Blue. You've got Han 2 Data Vault. You've got Han 2 Blue Force. And it's like, okay, well, when you compare like Han Blue and Han Blue Force, they're similar, but also have different kind of game plans because you do need to play a lot of Force units to generate the Force. Han Data Vault is a little bit more bigger, whereas Han ECL is a little bit more low to the ground to take advantage of like Poet Wreck or ECL. So you have a lot of versatility with this one. And so this one definitely makes it into the S tier and definitely makes it probably like top 3 as of right now. But someone that, you know, I think the leader shows more power. Like I think the fact is that the leader's ability is so powerful that, you know, it's not a specific aspect combination that's really strong. It's the leader ability magnifying those aspect combinations that allows you to play these different combinations. And that just goes to show you that the leader itself is even stronger than you might think in the current meta. To start us off in the Cunning category, which is now where we're at. Let me zoom out one more time. I know, it's getting smaller. But like I said, I'll try to put the leaders on the screen. We've got Cad Bane. Now, this is one that, has fallen off a cliff. I mean, an absolute cliff. Like in set 5, we actually had a reasonable amount of Cad Banes being played. You know, this was still a leader that people were playing and still performing decently well. And especially before ban, this is also the case. This set, there's like no Cad Banes whatsoever. I think that's because Turkentown got a lot worse and disrupting the early game is not necessary of a game plan. It's not like he's terrible, but he's definitely in like the top end of B tier category / low end of A tier. And you know what? I think as respect to Cad Bane, I've got to kind of put him in the low end of A tier. You know, a leader that really has changed my perspective on evaluating leaders in the future is Dr. Aphra. It might be a little bit surprising to say that to some of you, but when Dr. Aphra came out, we were still very early into the kind of lifespan of Star Wars. This was Shadows of the Galaxy, right? We had a whole slew of sets with rotation, not even consideration. And we were wondering whether or not we were going to see some sort of, synergy with this action, which is, or, static ability of discarding a card from your deck every single round. Turns out there wasn't really anything to support this strategy. And unfortunately, Aphra is a D tier. This is, as I said, this has kind of changed my perspective in that, maybe leaders, they just have to work in the current landscape of it for me to, or at least have some potential in the current landscape for me to be excited about them at all. I was really excited about Aphra initially. And I was like, well, there's some cool things like Palpatine's Return is something, like maybe you can do something with that. And maybe we can do some combo elements in the future. It just never came around. So I guess we'll figure out in the future whether or not FG is going to kind of continue that game plan of keeping some leaders, in this really don't have anything to work with strategy, but I guess we'll find out. Fennec is up next, and definitely a leader that a lot of people have hated me for hating on. Hating is a strong word, but definitely gave me a hard time for hating on. And, honestly, I still think she's not very good. I do think there's a few new additions from the new set that have worked pretty nicely for her. And so that's kind of a hopeful thing. Some cards that actually work quite well. Just having cards that are less expensive, but then can still be ambushed for great effect. Having a bigger pool of that is good. And Fennec's ambush ability isn't terrible. I mean, you still do get the ability to ambush out some very powerful units for, well, maybe just an immediate death on K2SO and overwhelm for a little bit of damage, right? Something like that. She did win our top 8, at least a qualifier. So, we're going to put her above D tier for sure. And I still think she is above D tier just naturally. But I'm going to put her, kind of in the top end of C tier. Lando is absolutely my favorite aggro leader out of any of them. Like, any of them. It has been an absolute blast to play some ridiculous smuggle decks with this guy. And he's actually decently strong. I think a lot of people underrate him in terms of, this guy's like trash. When in reality, I mean, there's a lot of decks that just
aren't ready for, you to cap out on full resources and then just go to town with so many units from your resource pile and just continuously flood the board. It's not like he's crazy strong or anything. I'm not going to put him above C tier. He's kind of like a middle of the pack C tier leader, but he does have some element to him that no other deck has. Admiral Akbar, a leader that I've never really gotten behind, but has always performed just a little bit better than I was expecting. And it's not like I was expecting a lot out of this guy, okay? He does some cool things, the exhaust, creating a bunch of tokens and doing it to yourself, I think, is the key. Obviously, with double yellow, you got Chancellor Palpatine, but Admiral Akbar Data Vault and trying to leverage some of that stuff actually wasn't too bad. It was definitely more of like a C tier list, but I think it's actually gotten a good amount worse, especially with things like Hyperspace Disaster. People are playing main deck and sideboard now. And with cards like, Anakin leaders like Anakin just completely wrecking your overall game plan, just killing every single one of your units because all their units can kill your units in one shot. That said, Admiral Akbar still's got something going for it. It's like a mid to low C tier option. Then we've got Asajj. Asajj, one of the leaders that was really fun to play with double yellow for a long time. And now a leader that I pretty much exclusively play with always 2, which is also a fun time to do. There are some really powerful things you can do, like Treya into Asajj into always 2 and make a 4/7 and a 5/6 with double shields. And that pretty much wins you the game. But also very susceptible to dying, like extremely susceptible to dying. Very aggressive, but also very squishy. I wouldn't put her probably above like the higher end of C tier realistically. She is very aggressive because she is a 4 to deploy, but dies very, very easily. Our favorite droid leader in General Grievous never really had the time to shine. Honestly, this guy really has done nothing the entire time he's been in the game. I mean, like, absolutely nothing. Not enough droid units to really make him work. A little bit late of a deploy. Decent stat line, to be honest, but only exclusively really works with droids. And so, unless you've got a lot of them early on, you're not really going to be doing a whole lot with General Grievous. And he ends up being, a solidly D tier option. Really just doesn't give you anything. Nothing special. At the best, it's a Sentinel. At the worst, it's nothing. And even at the best, it's basically a step above nothing. So if you're putting a bunch of droids in your deck to try to play this, you're probably making your deck worse. Chancellor Palpatine, but instead of the new version or the OG version, we got the mid version. And I would say it's probably in the mid version as well in terms of B tier. I'm actually just going to immediately slot it kind of solidly in the B tier category. This guy has got some power to him. You do have like the ability to draw, create a bunch of tokens, all that good stuff. You don't have a leader deploy, which is always a problem, but you do have Anakin, and Anakin's a huge powerhouse. You do get to play the best of both worlds in terms of villainy and heroism, but that can lead to awkward games. So you have a little bit of power behind you with all the drawing and healing and getting access to some of the most powerful cards that can really give you a huge advantage. But also, it can sometimes be inconsistent and punish you really hard when you're in that kind of category. So high payout generally, but also sometimes you're sitting there with all villainy cards on the heroism side and all heroism cards on the villainy side, and you're like, what did I even do with my life? Next up, we've got Quinlan. Now, this one has always been one that has been near the top of the meta as well, except for this set. To be honest, he's very underperformed. He's not even in the top 15. He's still a good list. Tarkin Town, like I said, has just gotten a lot weaker, especially when you have things like Gunji running around where you can just literally, avoid getting Tarkin Town because he survives it. I mean, that is insane, especially when you're playing against Anakin. Like, you try to play like Sabine, Tarkin Town in your opponent's unit, and they just Gunji and kill your Sabine. Like, ugh, it's so bad for you. And that's like best case scenario, right? So certainly, especially like Captain Typho is also a really big problem. He's not bad. Still a very solid, like kind of more aggro-oriented list, but somewhere in kind of the A tier category. Very mid to low A tier. And next we got a list that I know a lot of people love, and that is Admiral Trench. This guy really, really is not that great. You do get to filter your hand a little bit, and I do think Trench with Anakin is interesting, because you can, like, here's the thing, okay? You're putting a bunch of heroism cards in your deck that cost a lot, and then you're trying to utilize Anakin, but you put a bunch of heroism cards that cost a lot in your deck just to use Trench's action. So while that is a little bit of a payoff, it also makes your deck really inconsistent. And then you have this leader deploy that actually only comes out on 6 resources, and you're paying 3 resources for it. So it's not like you're maintaining parity on the board. You're just drawing a couple of cards. And that can be good against certain matchups, but most of them not. So to me, Trench is very, very low on in the C tier. Very, very weak. And now we've got another one of my showcases. The final one. 2 of 2, right? After the Cassian. Rio Durant. This one's not good. I was really hoping for this guy because you have this like interesting pilot. You could play like a bunch of transports and you can, you know, pay your action, get the 1 damage in. There's just not a lot of shielded space units anymore. And honestly, the extra 1 power isn't really changing the game because a lot of the times people, when they're going for space strategies, either they're going to be like completely overwhelming, either with pilots or with a bunch of units, or they're just going to put up a couple spaces to compete with your space strategy. And so Rio, like, I've tried, and if I see a Jedi Starfighter on the opposite side of the battlefield against Anakin, it's just concede. It's just concede. This guy, I do not think is actually very good at all. I think he's solidly in the D tier category. I think going into a full space strategy for Rio to try to utilize his action or anything like that is just bad. I think he should be going for so many other options. For example, Major Von Reg, you can just play that. And, well, you kind of have the same thing, except you don't have to pay 1 resource for it. Next up, we've got Han 4. Now, this guy has made a surprising upturn. Han 4 did some absolute work in the meta so far. Sudden Ferocity is a huge addition, as well as some other space units that he got. But Sudden Ferocity explicitly just exceptionally powers up his overall game plan of leveraging the additional resources you get on that turn. This guy is definitely an A tier option at the higher end of it. Not going to quite put him in the S tier. He is a little bit inconsistent and does have a counterable game plan, especially if you load up with a couple of space units and you're able to compete on that level. Like, again, I keep mentioning Anakin's Jedi Starfighter, but even if you're playing like Yoda and you got like a blue leader or something, just knocking out 1 or 2 of the space units before you get to the mid stage of the game when you can start to dominate, that's all you really, really need in some of these matchups. And then you just can take over the game. Now, there are some situations where he just outruns you and just completely one-shots you. And I say one-shot as in like kills you over the course of 4 turns with multiple unit attacks. So yeah, not one-shot at all, but you know what I mean. Han performing very well, very fast deck, very, very strong, but not quite S tier, high A tier. Kazuda is another one that, is very, very fast, has kind of a similar game plan of going wide with some space units and kind of powering them up with some pilots similar to Han. But instead of going the direction of leveraging a bunch of resources for extra power, extra units, you are just leveraging Kazuda's action to, well, put Heroic Sacrifice or Trench Run and just burn your opponent out. Not necessarily burn, but like combat trick your opponent out with extra power pumps. Very, very fast, very strong leader. Did get a couple of upgrades from the new set. And honestly, isn't quite cracked into the A tier spots, but it definitely solidifies himself into the high end of B tier for sure. Trench Run and Heroic Sacrifice can do some absurd things and certainly can catch your opponent off guard and completely take over the game. Next up, we've got Barriss, a leader from set 5 that has some really cool stuff, like a very, very fast kill combo with using the Force and readying up leaders on repeat. But nothing really has come about Barriss and actually performance. Getting some discounts on events is cool and all, but it kind of requires a little bit of setup. And usually you just kind of want to use that Force for the event itself, or for something else. Like if you're using Barriss's action and trying to play like Sorceress Blast, you suddenly can't do that. And that's kind of what I mean. So, I played like Barriss and tried to Shatter Point one time. Don't even talk about it, okay? She's going into the C tier. She's going into the lower end of C tier. Maybe I'm just biased, okay? Maybe I'm just biased. Yeah, I mean, I'm biased for all these guys. What are you going to do about it? It's my video. Please watch. Please keep watching. I'm sorry. But it's still my video. Barriss and C tier. Grand Inquisitor's next. We got a 3-5 again. Poor Chirrut. This guy's got shield in. We have an action to make things smaller. this guy's trash. I'm gonna be honest. Grand Inquisitor, in limited, it's actually not bad. In Premier, that's not what you want to be doing at all. If your advantage is trying to shrink down your opponent's units to try to trade with them, you have to play such higher cost units and use those attacks on lower cost units that's probably not even going to be relevant or applicable. This guy is definitely, he's not like he's bad. Okay, he's D tier. He's a D tier. He is actually a D tier. My boy Cal, unfortunately, does not have the Jedi tag. And unfortunately, that makes him a lot worse. But also, he is a 4 to deploy 3/4, which also is pretty bad. He has this weird force ability to exhaust your opponent's units, which is actually okay, not great. He never really got off the ground and never really performed all that well. He's not terrible. He does have this tempo game plan, which is interesting, and he does deploy early to put on pressure on your opponent, which is what you want to be doing in Cunning Heroism anyways. So that's all bonus. That's all good things to say about Cal. Unfortunately, he is still a 3/4, and unfortunately, he does not end games. If you want to play an aggro deck, you should just play Rebels. He's going to end up in the C tier category, but pretty low on the totem pole in terms of effectiveness. Qui-Gon has gotten a lot better just by the nature of the meta shifting. When in a format where you have like Anakins and Yodas and these decks that are trying to continuously gain advantage or like put up Sentinel blockers and do all these things, a deck that's able to like sneak attack Caloran back out, get value, kill a unit, and then immediately bounce it for more effectiveness. Like, you don't need to do all these things to try to keep up with your opponent, because just by playing units, you are naturally keeping up with your opponent and getting rid of all the cards in their hand. He's actually doing really, really good. He's actually doing really, really good compared to what we had initially thought for him. Not only that, but you also have some new additions like Duchess Investigators, which are really strong. This guy's going to go in the B tier. He's going to go on the higher end of B tier. I've been very impressed with Qui-Gon. Slymore has surprised me a little bit. I would have put her in like the D tier, but she does do some things, and she actually has top 8 at a PQ. And so I think by, merit, we can't put her in the D tier. That's just the rules, right? But she's not great. Getting a bunch of spy or paying 1 resource for a spy token is not bad at all. I actually don't mind that action. The problem is that you have to have 4 exhaust units on the battlefield, which isn't too difficult to get if you are building towards it. But that strategy of building towards it isn't actually all that effective. You have a 3/6 that deals 2 damage to an exhausted unit, so you can finish off units or get rid of some random small units. But against a better deck, usually they don't have things that are really amazing for you to finish off. And so Slymore ends up kind of being in that like real mediocre C tier section for me, which is like right in the middle. I'm sorry, but we're going to spend approximately 15 seconds talking about C3PO. He is a 1/6 that has an action that you have to pay to exhaust something. That's it. And next up, we've got Padme. So Padme, she's a lot better. She actually did some pretty good work here in the earlier stages of the meta, but has not actually top 8'd anything. A lot of people were interested in her because she's kind of like the new Quinlan. But, she never really performed to the same degree that Quinlan does, mainly because she's a turn later to deploy. But she does have some interesting things like with Marin and Poe Dameron, lots of good synergies. Definitely a solid list. I think I could solidly put her in like the B tier category, and I think most people would agree. On another note, we've got Sabe, and Sabe is very, very interesting. She's also one that, people brought a lot to the earlier stages of the meta, and people are still bringing. And actually, she's top 8 at some PQs. She's actually done quite well for herself. She has an interesting ability of being able to really interact with your opponent's game plan, messing with your top of their deck, messing with their hand when she deploys. That second part is definitely the more important of the two. But it's not like she's oppressively interactive. She definitely deserves a B tier position, but nothing too incredible. Messing with your opponent's top cards is good, but you draw 2 turn, so it's really, really hard to prevent your opponent from drawing something that's really effective against you. It's when she flips and starts messing with your opponent, with the hand. Oof, that's when it starts to be obnoxious. DJ's next, and this one's interesting. I've played a lot of DJ because I found it fun to play double Cunning, right? But there's just not enough strength in these decks to really see them do some work. Like these decks that have like no second aspect or don't have or like are indexing towards a certain game plan with like aspects just have not worked out. And DJ's no different. You get the double aspect portion, but you're missing on Heroism and Villainy, which is a lot of cards and a lot of powerful ones at that. But not only that, but also the game plan of DJ, where you're trying to capture your own units and get value from that. There are some really good synergies like Pirated Starfighter. But outside of that, I mean, really, it's a really dirtily and dorky game plan, but doesn't really pan out. And in fact, going in his direction and trying to play him ends up just doing some weird things and probably losing you games more than you've won. D tier. Grand Admiral Thrawn, we've got back from set 1. Definitely one of my favorite showcases in the game. This guy, you can play him as a hard control. He did get some cool new additions. Actually, just a few days ago when I was playing Carabast, I got absolutely wrecked by Grindin and Bazine and repeating Grindin and Bazine over and over and over again against Thrawn. So he's got that going for him, and then he's got the ability to exhaust, evacuate all your units, and then super laser blast them away. You can play a very hard control style with Thrawn, and it does do decently, but it's not fantastic. It's like a mid C tier option. And spoiler alert for this next one. And I gotta zoom out again. I thought I was done zooming out, but spoiler alert for this next one. This is the final S tier, and he is the number 1 deck of the format right now. Or number 1 later, or number 2, or number 3. I'm not gonna argue with you guys because it's my video. So Han is going to be the number 1 on our list, okay? And I'll give the edge to him because he's got the Han greens that are like absolutely performing incredibly well. But then also you've got the Han 1 yellows that are doing well and various versions of Han 1 greens that are doing well. So like ECL, Data Vault, and 30 HP base and Han yellows. It's because his action is so incredibly strong. And we've come full circle. We've had like Sabine and Boa in set 1, and then as soon as Boa gets banned, we've got Han coming in and doing some absolute work. And then people hated Han, so they tried to ban him out by taking away DJ. And then we had the Force Throws in the meta prevalently, and then they banned Force Throw, and then Han's back, and everyone hates Han again. His action is just disgusting. I mean, so many angles you can attack on. Going for 7 drops early is really hard to compete for. But then also playing a Millennium Falcon, putting a Chewbacca on turn 2, hitting for 7 every single turn is disgusting as well. So you got some problems with Han in the meta, okay? It's a strong deck. This one's pretty quick as well. For the same reasons I'm putting Grand Inquisitor in the D tier, I am putting Jin in the D tier, even weaker. She's a little bit later to deploy. And her action is less effective in that she only reduces the power by 1. Again, a very, very solid limited leader, but not a solid leader outside of that. I can't tell you how many times I actually won limited events with this girl, so it kind of hurts me to put her in D tier, but I've always put her in D tier, and she's still D tier. Nothing's changed. Mandalorian's next, and this guy has always charmed me a little bit. I like the game plan of Mandalorian. I think with the pilots, he did get a good amount better, but I don't think he's gotten anything since then, really. Obviously, units that you can play as units, but then also play as upgrades on your space units is kind of cool with Mandalorian. That works around with upgrades, right? So Mandalorian, I mean, the exhausting units potential is decently strong. You do have a little bit of a later deploy, which can mess things up. But overall, not bad at all. I think he fits, again, solidly kind of in this C tier clump. All these leaders are kind of like, okay, they got to do something. I'll put them in the C tier. If anyone wants to argue that Major Von Reg is down here and, like, I don't know, Jabba the Hutt is up here, I think I would be able to listen to your argument. I think the C tier is very difficult to, like, place each one of these lists, but it kind of just fits in the middle. But that was the last of our Cunning options. Now we move on to Revan and Anakin, but with no aspects. And I'll just do these guys together because I think the logic applies to both of them. They don't have enough cards to really, really shine. And in Revan's case, his leader deploys a 3/6. In Anakin's case, he's a 4/6, which is a little bit better. But Anakin, the problem is, yes, you can play like Anakin Blue and get the Anakin power, which is cool and all. But you're playing a bunch of villainy cards that if you don't have the force and can't continue to generate it, you probably have ruined your entire deck. And then Revan is a 3/6 where the whole game plan is to kill your opponent's units, but then you don't have units that can actually live the combat steps. And yes, if you're hitting units all day, your opponent has time to develop the board and get big removal down or big units that are just going to outpace yours, and that can be a problem as well. Both of them fall kind of into the same category where there's not enough cards to choose from, and that really, really hinders them from really being good. I think Revan is... It's hard to say, because Revan's played a lot more than Anakin, but I think Anakin's ability to play like Unit Anakin, the Vigilance version, and like Overwhelming Barrage can do some powerful things. It's just very inconsistent. So I'll put him, up here. And then Revan, you got to put down here. I mean, a 3/6, killing other units. Oh, every single time I play this guy, I'm like, well, I better not fight an Anakin. Otherwise, I just lose. Like, it is not even close. It's like there's nothing I can do. So we'll put those both in the C tier category. But I now have 108 recordings to go through and edit for you guys. We're left with Boba Fett and Jango Fett on the bottom of the list. For my final thoughts, I figured I'd kind of, for fun, place them on the tier list should they be in the meta. I think, realistically, Jango would still be quite incredible. One of the best things about Anakin is that you can use your action to get in attacks. And if you're just constantly tempoing them out and playing that space strategy, I think Jango would still be quite excellent. I think there's a good chance that Jango could end up S tier. I think Boba also is something that could also be S tier. I do find that the game has evolved a lot to where, maybe Boba wouldn't be S tier. But I think based on my predictions, and every single time Boba has showed up, he's completely dominated. Like, I've played him post-banning, and it's still disgusting. I mean, getting like 3 extra resources on that flip turn and going like Boba Fett unit into like, I don't know, Cantina Bouncer, or if you're playing, your command version, you just play like a random 5-drop. It is so good, and it's still good. So I would expect both of these somewhere in the S or high A tier category. That's where I would expect them to be. But alas, they are trash. So, because they're banned. But every other list, I mean, I think this is a pretty reasonable list. A lot of it's based on kind of performance in the recent meta, in the PQs and things like that. But also a lot of this portion, like a lot of the top portion is really based on, well, my experience, but then also a lot of the data. But then as soon as you get past like Director Krennic, Sabe, that type of stuff, all of this is from like personal experience and overall effectiveness on like Karabast and the lack thereof of data. So, take it with a grain of salt. I'm sure there's a list here that people, or a leader that people are like, yeah, that's just wrong. And you know what? Make your own video and put them at the S tier. I don't know what to tell you. That said, if you guys made it to the end and you watched the full thing, you didn't fall asleep, which is probably what I would do. I don't even know. I'm probably like maybe 2 hours and 20 minutes into this thing. It's probably the longest video I've ever had on the channel. Let me know in the comments. I don't know. Comment just like a happy face for the algorithm or something. I don't know. Just let me know. Let me know if you made it to the end. If you have any disagreements, let me know also. I'm curious to hear what you would put in S tier, what you would put in A tier. I think S and A tier are pretty like, just this is what's happening in the meta. And then any B and C and D tier is where, people would disagree, I think. And so that's what I'm curious about. But maybe you got a hot take and think, Anakin's trash or something. Let me know. Thanks for watching, everyone. This was a long one. I'm going to go sleep because I'm tired now. And I'll see you all for the next one.